If you have an interest in horses and love learning more about horses, the horse industry, teaching, or even managing your own horse business, then you're in the right place. We would love you to join us on our mission, which is to improve the lives of horses around the world through the education of riders, handlers, and trainers. So get comfortable, listen in, and enjoy.
We've got Katharine back today, Katharine Chrisley, but before I do that, I just want to remind you about the values of International Horse College. So horse welfare and safety are of utmost importance when humans have any interaction with horses. And within the courses at International Horse College, we only utilise methods that promote safe and humane ways of interaction between horses and humans. We only support safe methods of educating riders, handlers and trainers in all our courses at internationalhorsecollege.com, registered training organisation 31352. Now, Katharine, we're talking about cantering today.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now, Katharine, I've had a look at your questions. You know, some of them I think, I'd say a different way, but I think this is a really good way for us to say to the horse world, you know. So I'm coming in from a dressage and eventing background in Australia. You know, you've got a different background. Some of your terminology is going to be different to my terminology.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So I think, well, let's get going with this. And there's actually one particular word that, when I was in the US, we used to talk about it a lot. And then I came back here and started talking about it. And they went, no, that's the wrong word. Just you're talking about this. So let's just sort of move on. But we'll go through. We're going to talk about the canter today. So as an introduction, first of all, why did you choose this?
I've been working with some people lately who had never cantered a horse. And so we were talking about just all the basics and the understanding of it. One thing I think when I teach is if I can bring the understanding of how it works and what's going on in the horse's body when you canter, it helps people understand why I'm saying something. And I may say it quickly like, oh, inside shoulder back, you know, and they'll understand that they need to, as we always say, align their shoulders where they want the horse's shoulders to be, align their hips where they want the horse's hips to be, and allow the horse to follow that position. And if I can have them understand that, that's why, then when I say it, it comes a little quicker to perceive it and to do it. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Well, there's two things I just want to bring up there, and that's the first one is teaching people to canter. It's a really big thing in some cases. You know, walk and trot's okay, particularly if you've got a horse that's a bit big and a bit energetic in the canter. You know, you're not just on a little pony that sort of goes around and does a 4-beat canter the same speed as a trot, you know. So
right.
That's, I mean, while you say, well, we don't want that, we actually do, because they're the ones that really build up the confidence in some of our riders. And
it's essential, yeah.
And some of our horses that don't have pure gaits and they never, ever make it in the show ring are sometimes the absolutely ideal horses to teach beginners on.
Not everything is in the show ring, right?
That's right. Yeah. Now, I want to bring it a little bit further when you said about aligning shoulder and hips, because I think I understand you, but I want to expand that a little bit, right? So if we're aligning our shoulders and hips, if I think of a circle, right, and I put a pin in the middle of the circle. So we've got the horse going round on the circle, following the circle, and we put a line between the outside shoulder, the inside shoulder, and the pin in the middle. Right?
I like this analogy. Yeah.
Okay. The outside hip, the inside hip, and the pin in the middle. Right. And then the rider has the outside shoulder, the inside shoulder, the pin in the middle, the outside hip, the inside hip, and the pin in the middle.
I like that.
Does that make sense? Right. So then we can say, well, we're aligning our hips and shoulders. And we're not getting our riders going around in some sort of twisted, contorted position. You know, they're naturally aligning their hip and shoulder because they're thinking of aligning with the middle and just following the circle. Yeah.
I like that because it is a subtle thing. Anything twisty and dramatic is going to confuse the horse and going to put the rider at disadvantage.
Yeah. And I even know that I'll explain it one way. I might explain it like that to a rider and they don't get it. And then I've got to go and if you've got a few different explanations in your toolbox, sometimes you can go from one to the other, and it might be your third or fourth one before the rider goes, oh, I get it now. Yeah.
I draw circles in the dirt, horse's spine, following that curve. Yeah, and if the curve is tight, but 100 different ways to get through, and we all sort of speak or comprehend differently.
And then someone will come into a lesson one day and say, I really got the spine following this shape of the circle, and then I found out that a lot of the horses' spines actually fuse together, and you go, oh, forget about that. We'll talk about that now, So it's like you teach something in the first place, and then you've got to say, okay, now we're going to learn a little bit more in depth, or this is what we're going to do now. Now we need to make it a bit of a more subtle aid, or think of doing this, and now we're going to make it look not so, thinking that a good rider looks like they just sit there. A good rider, if they're a good rider, they look like they're doing nothing.
You know what I say? I say that in the beginning when we're riding, our seat and our body sort of interferes with the horse. And then as we learn, we begin to follow the horse. And later we influence the horse. But it's a process.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. You can't influence if you can't even control your own body. Yeah.
Right.
All right. So we're going to start off the legs. So you might say how the legs work in canter. I might say what's the sequence of legs in the canter, but I think they both mean the same thing. Is that right?
The same exact thing. It's just the canter is a gait of 3 beats. And in an ideal world, it initiates with the outside hind as the first beat, then the diagonal pair of inside hind, outside foreleg land together, then the leading inside foreleg lands. There's a moment of suspension, and then it repeats. And this is talking about, on a circle, thinking of the lead. And in an ideal world, it starts on the outside, on the hind. But a lot of horses will pick it up from that leading foreleg. And young horses, inexperienced horses that aren't quite sure what you're asking, that can happen. And in this country, with saddle seat riders and Western riders, often they'll kind of position the horse's head to the outside to open up and kind of pop that inside shoulder so that leg comes out and takes the lead. And then it begins off of the very last beat of the canter. In the dressage and in the hunters and working, we tend to want the horse to depart from the hind end. And it's such a subtle difference, but the way that we align their body to get that is different.
Yeah. It's almost a trick, that tiny bit of flexion to the outside of the circle.
It is.
Okay, it's a bit of a trick, and people go, it's incorrect, it's wrong. But if you think using the technique of, say, supporting outside rein, but almost going into a bit of shoulder fore as I go to canter, and I think the outside rein support helps to put them onto the correct lead. But I think, and depending too, the training horses. So training horses, if a horse has been trained a particular way, say it's been trained to flex to the outside of the circle, and you don't want to do it like that, sometimes you've got to say, well, let's just start to train this way, and then we'll influence the horse a bit more. And by the time you've done a few and influenced the horse a bit more, then the horse goes, oh, it's a supportive outside rein, it's a bit of shoulder fore, and then I go onto the correct lead. Yeah.
Oh, exactly. And, if I have a horse that knows a certain aid, a certain way of allowing his body to pick up the lead that you want, we don't suddenly change that, because then we're not going to have success. The horse will be confused. You work through, and sometimes on a young horse, to help him, you're going to support him a little bit more on that outside rein and allow the opening of that shoulder to take that. But it's just a way to think of how horses start the canter, kind of either one way or the other, with on the forehand or on the haunches, and it's harder to start on the haunches. That's why.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, the horse has got to be a more educated horse and working less on the forehand. Yeah. Anyway, the inside leg, you call it the power leg. Tell me how you explain that.
Because, like we're talking with the canter, like at the walk and the trot, the horse is always supported equally on each side.
Yep.
In the canter, the horse has to stay slightly bent. He's bent slightly to the lead, and the lead will be the inside of the turn that you're making, at least at this point, until we start talking about counter canter. the horse is always bent to the canter and to the lead. And when this is happening, there's engagement of the haunches. And I call the inside hind leg the power leg because it's coming under and taking a little more weight than any other leg as the horse canters. And by being aware of that and that bend, that's the leg that's balancing. So the horse is always slightly bent in the canter. When they look straight, it's an illusion that they are moving straight. It's because they possibly have a tiny bit of shoulder in, something to allow the body. The horse's hips are wider than the horse's shoulder. So in the canter, if they go perfectly straight, here's the thing, and if we straighten up, they come right back to trot. Because if everything straightens up, the only thing that body can do is trot. If there's that little bit of flexion, that little bit of bend, both hopefully, that allows the horse to push off each time with that power leg, that inside hind leg. Even though it starts with the outside, it's that diagonal pair that land in unison that create that ability to maintain the canter. And so, yeah, a power leg might possibly be just my own terminology.
But I think the way you've explained it, and I think as instructors, we do tend to get, especially if we're not mentored and not teaching in front of group. I suppose I'm in a fortunate position where, I do a lot of training of instructors and from that yeah. I'm very much aware of people using terminology that may not be quite classical. You're talking about a power leg, and that may be a good terminology to teach some of your students. Right? But you've just got to be aware and say to them, this is the way I explain it. You might go to another instructor who doesn't explain it quite like this, but this is the way I find best to do that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And technically in any turn, no matter the gait, when a horse is turning, that would be the power leg. The leg that engages more, is that always that inside hind on a turn?
Well, I always think when I'm explaining trot diagonals, we sit in the saddle, and you're more influential when you sit in the saddle. But it's the inside hind creates a lot more energy than the outside. So think of sitting in the saddle when the inside hind is on the ground, which is the same time as the outside fore. If
that's
we're
how you can check.
It.
You can look down and check it, but you don't look back at the hind leg.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So it's sort of, I think that's everyone gets their way of explaining things that they find easier. And then sometimes too, I teach a lot of instructors, and sometimes they'll explain something and I'll say, that's a really good way of explaining that.
I love your pin. I love your pin analogy at the middle of anyway.
Yeah. I just think that's the way that I've found, because I know I was riding. I didn't understand, and I thought I had to ride a bit twisted and contorted, and it was quite a few years before someone said, no, it's got to be a little bit different. Yeah.
Subtle. Yeah.
Tell me about changing leads, because you've talked about inside and outside. So obviously, if we're going to the right's the inside. And if we're going to the left is the inside. Well, we're not talking about canter at this stage, but anyway, changing leads. Tell me how we change leads. And we'll first of all talk about why we change leads, and then let's talk about how we change leads.
Keep a horse in balance in a turn. If you're going down a straight line at the canter, really doesn't matter what lead you're on. Like say you're a trail rider and you're just going to go ahead and canter down this nice straight stretch of sand. It won't matter which lead you're on. You don't want to stay on one for the long time, just like changing your posting diagonal. You would kind of come down and change over to the other lead so your horse gets balanced. But if you're on a turn, any kind of turn, your horse will be more balanced on that inside lead because the horse's body wants to bend to the lead. So when you want to change direction, you want to change the lead that you're on. And the horse understands this. If you watch horses, running around together, I'll say cantering or galloping. We'll talk about gallop later. They will kind of plan ahead, and they're coming up to a corner or a fence, and they're going to decide, I'm going to turn to the right. So they know they're going to take the right lead. And they do that on their own, and they go back and forth. And they are very balanced when they're doing that because they are prepared and they know. When you're riding, he doesn't necessarily know that, okay, I'm going to come up here on a figure 8 and I'm going to go the other direction. So you have to change leads, either a simple change of lead, which is coming down to another gate. The trot is easier. Coming all the way to the walk is a little harder. And then you pick up the canter on the other lead. The other way that you do is a flying change, which the horse will do on his own, which is to change both sets of legs to the other lead. Now, it's considered correct if it changes behind first and then the front,
So
but it's not
after that period of suspension.
right, exactly. It's not a sin on your horse's part if he changes in front and then changes behind. It's just not considered correct. But if he's doing that, he's trying to give you what you want, and it could be that he doesn't yet understand that everything is changing to the other direction. A flying change of lead is something that has to be with finesse taught to the horse, and it's the subtle aids that we finally are giving that can tell him, here we come, we're going to change. And he changes in that suspension, just like they can change what lead they're on over a jump. We can talk about that later too. But if he only changes on one and doesn't change on the other, he's in what we call a cross canter or a disunited canter.
It's interesting, and that's probably the word that I was going to bring up. So, I was in Florida for about 12 months, and we talked a lot about cross-cantering, right? Cross-cantering. And I came back to Australia and I got slammed for it. What's this cross-canter? Disunited canter, So I understand what you mean when you're saying cross-cantering, but a disunited canter, if we're interpreting into Australian as well.
Is exactly it, yeah. And the disunited canter is just one lead on the front, the opposite lead on the hind. But if you watch horses carefully, you can see why that can happen. If a horse is in a very small circle on the lunge or in a round yard or something like that, going very small, they will often, because they feel like they're going to fall over, they'll start leaning. The circle's too small for them at that point. They'll start leaning and they will go into that disunited canter to try to hold their balance and not just kind of flop over. So one of the things I notice when people are riding, if they are making their circle too small, they're at the canter, they spiral in too small, the horse may end up swapping leads and trying to figure out how to stay up. We want to always remember that we have to set them up for success and give them an appropriate size of a circle or a turn for the level of training and musculature and suppleness that they have, so that they can maintain it and not be uncomfortable with it.
Yep. Okay. So we've got, we talked about the flying change. We've talked about the disunited canter, also called the cross cantering. And I've got to put in too, I did a chat with Christoph Hess. We did something, he said, and the whole chat, we're sort of summarising more towards beginner riders, but for someone who's a dressage rider who really, really wants to get into the depth of this subject, there's a really good chat there. But I think what we're doing is giving a lot broader overview of the canter. And I think sometimes people say, look, just give me the broad overview. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So techniques to get a proper lead depart. What do you use? We talked a little bit about, correct leads and how to get a horse going from trot to canter or walk to canter before and what we're doing with the contact. But what aids do you normally teach your beginners, like when they're first going into canter, just learning about going in or even preparing, going on a bit further, but to get a proper lead depart? What do you think helps there?
I tell them to imagine they have an eyeball in the middle of their chest, and with that eyeball, they want to look in the direction they're going to go.
Okay,
and, say they're on a circle, and that helps with that whole shoulder position. And instead of saying, like often people say, put your outside leg back, I say, have your outside hip back. That just puts the leg back a little bit. We don't want to do, this exaggeration. And on a horse that already knows it, which hopefully a green rider is not on a green horse. In a horse that knows, I say, scoop with your inside sitting bone, as if you're just, scooping ice cream out of something with your inside sitting bone. Lift your shoulders, eyeball in your chest, everything all at once. Both legs, because one leg means, to move a little bit over. Both legs at the same time. Inside leg is at the girth. And ask for the canter and imagine that you're holding a shopping cart and you're pushing the shopping cart down the aisle. Don't throw it away and don't pull back. And those are my and we go through it over and over and talk it through. if a rider has the awareness of the footfalls in the trot, because you can practice a lot at rising trot and understand, okay, what the trot is, then you begin sitting trot, because generally you're going to get a better depart from a sitting trot, even if it's just for that one stride, than you will from rising. But if you're feeling that and you know when inside, or say left leg grounds, right leg grounds, left leg, right leg, left. If you are thinking of how the canter begins with that outside hind leg, as soon as you feel the inside hind leg ground, you give your canter aid, and that outside hind leg is what's coming up and pushes the horse off. And then you can roll out into the canter if you haven't somehow restricted in front or distorted the aids for it. And by that awareness, you can have it. If someone's having trouble, or if I'm working with a horse that's having trouble with a lead or with understanding it, I'll start trotting a figure 8 with a pole on the ground in the middle. And each time they come to the figure 8, they will trot over that pole. And then just as they come to it, I'll say, I want you to trot the circle to the right, canter the circle to the left. Ask for your canter depart as you step over that. Horse and rider have both gotten into that, here I'm doing a figure 8 thing. And as soon as they start to step over the pole, it can help because there's a little elevation in the horse as they step over. Rider gives the aid immediately at that point, and the horse will tend to just pick up the correct lead. It's a useful tool. There are lots of tools and things we can use. It's an explanation that this is the direction we're going, both for the rider and for the horse. And if you canter one side, trot the other side, then later you switch it and you trot the left circle and canter the right circle. The rider gets that feel of how to tell the horse this is the way we're going to go. I mean, a lot of people have some pretty blatant and perhaps aggressive ways to get it. But that's not the point. The point is to set the horse up to be successful and to be balanced in it. And as soon as they're understanding, they're wanting to do it. They want to know which way we're going. They don't want to get out of balance.
Yep. Look, I love the way that you've explained that. It's I could probably just sit on the rail and listen to you teaching all day and go, oh, that's a good way of explaining it. That's a good way of explaining that. Do you find that the kids and the teenagers, they say, oh, let's just go. I just want to go faster and higher and let's get going. But then as people get a little older and, I don't know, more intellectual, more just thinking about things, they much prefer to know exactly, and you saying about this leg touches the ground and that's when you do it. And they really develop the feel and really want to get that accurate, and they're more worried about getting it precise rather than just getting out and doing it. Yeah. And I like the outside hip back. We talk often about the outside leg back in canter, but, when we go back to that pin analogy, a horse's, the outside leg should already be a little back. Anyway, if you just, if you're going around and following, and sometimes if the rider puts their outside leg back, that just encourages the, might be back in the flanks or something that's going to encourage the horse to kick up.
Right.
So that can be a bit of a problem. Yeah. So just to do with the techniques to change leads, what do you use there? If you're changing, you're using the techniques that you've said from trot over a pole to canter, but to change leads, do you use that jump in the middle or not, or how do you do that?
I like to have that pole to help me teach so that the horse is understanding too. And of course, if it's one of my school horses, I used to have school horses. I'm mostly rescue horses now, but the horses that I have trained, they know exactly what's going on. It helps the rider because the rider too needs to be set up for success. If we're going to do, say we're going to canter the entire figure 8 now with the pole that they go over right at the center, then I will have them, this is my best tool sometimes to make them understand that you ask for the other lead when you start the next bend. So I have them come to the trot and, 2 strides out from that pole and ask for the canter as they go over it. A lot of times you see people, the riders asking the horse to come to the trot and then change leads, but they keep their flexion and their bend in the old direction and don't completely change it. The pole helps. It's a visual aid, not just for the horse. It's a visual aid for the rider and a visual aid for me to see if they are getting it, so to speak. It helps me to further explain. And the truth is, like when a horse goes over a jump, it's just a big canter stride up in the air.
Yeah.
Right. And so you can even take it, if you have a horse that is jumping, you can make a little cross rail there, eventually a little tiny vertical. You're doing things to help the rider understand, and the horse is going, okay, I'm a little bit in the air, I'm a little bit suspended here, I'm going on to the other lead. And that's what you do over a jump. You're on a course and you're going to change direction at that jump. You've come in on the left lead. As soon as the horse comes off the ground with the forelegs, you take that eyeball in your chest and you look in the other direction you're going to go. And just because it's happening quickly, and I'll say, step a little bit more on your new inside stirrup, because it's going to give the horse the direction that we're changing direction. And it's not a lot, it's like 2 ounces more, but the horse feels it.
Mm-hmm.
And just that change in your body position will help for the landing. Because as the horse goes over the jump, they're still maybe in that left lead, they're going to change to their right lead, their off lead. The least little bit of indication that way, he can change those legs. He's in the air and has that moment to do it, and he can change and land on that right foreleg. And like we say, that's the last part of that stride. So when he lands on that right foreleg, he's going to come into that right lead canter in most every situation. And why not help him? Give him a lot of indication. Don't think he's a machine that you program, right?
Yeah. And then this is where I think too, we've talked before about horses in the show ring and horses and teaching horses or teaching riders or whatever. And as far as teaching show jumpers, that's just a normal thing. I suppose as a dressage purist, you think, well, you don't want to have that one stride disunited canter, because as you go over the jump, you're landing and changing in front first and then changing behind the next stride. But as far as teaching riders how to do a change, teaching horses that show jump how to do a change, it's often used that way. And just the exercises, just having something like when we go over this pole, it makes sure the riders are coming up and they're going, I'm getting ready. And it's a good thing to keep the riders keeping their mind on the job as well. Yeah.
Right. We all need tools.
Oh, exactly. And I think this is where you get different tools depending on which level of riders that you're teaching, and what their goals are. If their goals are just, I just want to canter, or I just want to, learn how to do this, then you can focus on that. But if they say, well, I want to be a Grand Prix dressage rider, then it's a different goal.
Totally different.
Different riders, different things. Yeah.
And Glenys, I have had horses in my life, wonderful horses, who through some injury or inability within the body could not take a specific lead.
Yes.
Well, that horse doesn't go in the trash can. It's like, well, we can canter all day in the left lead out in the desert.
Yep.
So it's what your goal is, like you're saying, and it's what your horse can offer that you can go ahead and enjoy your relationship, right?
Yeah. And I think that's important, what the horse can offer, because if the horse can't offer certain things, then don't do those things. Don't. I had a lovely horse that he just was very, very uncomfortable in the canter, but he was lovely and quiet, and he'd walk and trot, and he had the most comfortable trot. Well, he's just a perfect horse to teach beginners on to do walk and trot.
Oh, yeah.
Walk and trot, put him on the lunge, and you could use him all day. Well, you don't want to use him all day, but, he's a very good horse. And by the time people are ready to canter, there might be another horse there that does, It could be one that's not suitable for the walk and trot, or one that can do the walk and trot. Maybe the 4-beat canter. And the 4-beat canter is not going to be suitable for a dressage horse, but is very suitable if they can canter the same speed as the trot, just to give them the riders the feeling of the canter. Yeah. And then you get some that are quite sound if you don't jump them, but you don't want to be jumping them too much, otherwise they're just, a bit old and not sound. So we've just got to use the horses for what they can, for what they're comfortable with. Yeah.
To always remember, what they can do.
Yep. Now, talk about the types of canter, because we've just talked about canter at this stage, and we've talked about the right and the left. I think but we talk about the canter first.
Sure. So what we call counter canter is the horse turning to the left on the right lead. And counter canter is a very useful exercise. I have found it to help with horses with back trouble.
Mhm.
But it's not going around on the wrong lead. And here's the difference between those two things. In counter canter, the horse is flexed to the lead. In the wrong lead, the horse is flexed to the left and cantering to the right, cantering on the right. You want the horse to always have his body bent to the lead. And if he says that slight bend and he's cantering on the right lead and turning to the left, and you can still see his right eye, the eyeball for the lead, then he is in counter canter.
Yeah, and I think that's an important explanation, because there is a bit difference between horses being on the wrong lead and horses being incorrect counter canter. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's a useful thing.
And it's quite a suppling exercise too.
Isn't it though?
Yeah.
Yep.
And very good, I think, just in preparing horses for collection, just to be able to do that counter canter. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
But talk now about the different types of canter. So we've talked about the counter canter. Now we'll talk about the types of canter within the canter. That makes sense.
Yeah. Yes. So a horse has, variations of engagement in the canter, and that just means the use of the haunches in supporting the weight of the horse and rider. And you always start with just what we would call a working canter, or even bring it down to a Western rider would say lope. We would say, an easy kind of 4-beat, very easy, slow canter to help the rider. But as the horse and rider are progressing, your first base canter is called working canter. And it's a distinct 3 beats. It has a modicum of engagement. The horse is in front of the vertical, and with his head and his pole is his highest point, and he's going along in a very relaxed condition. When you go from the working, you can teach the horse the medium canter, which has more engagement, slightly more
a medium extension. It's not an extended canter, it's just a medium.
Medium, right, exactly. Yeah. And you actually want to teach that before collection with most horses, because you want to be able to get the freedom and the swing of the legs and the shoulders and have the relaxation in the jaw, in the mouth. And because here's what collection, we've said medium is to bring the canter up a notch and to have the horse in that same relaxed engagement, and I don't want to use the word submission, of the jaw, the yielding of the jaw, much better word, so that you're bringing the horse to the aids, and and then there's free work where there's no contact. There's so many variables. But when we go from medium and we want to teach collection, we have to build strength in the horse. So we do the collected canter only for a dozen strides or so, and then let the horse refresh to medium and come back, or to work and come back. Collection is not slower. The beats, the sequence of the 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 of the canter will have the same rhythm. It just elevates the stride. So it is technically slower. They're not moving over more ground. They're moving over less ground. But it's because of the lifting of the hocks, the lifting of the knees, the lifting of the back, the more yielding of the jaw, because the face comes more toward the vertical. The pole is still the highest point. The neck is relaxed. The horse is relaxed, but he is pushing more upward than forward when he goes into the collection. And there are even varying degrees of collection, because it takes a lot to do a canter pirouette. And here I go on a tangent. But when the horse collects, it's like holding a box and just holding it up, and your arms get tired. In any of the collected gaits, you want to refresh the horse and send them out for a moment and come back to it, rather than working it constantly, because then you will begin to build suppleness and the musculature, and you'll have relaxation in the joints and all those things. But if you hold it for too long a period, that it becomes, then when the horse begins to chop in the stride, set against your hand, he becomes uncomfortable, and those are signals that he's telling you. collection comes, in my mind, after you've taught the horse to canter out freely and to begin to use the haunches more, and then the collection, and then you teach the extension, which is just like in the collection. The extended canter has the same 3 beats. The rhythm itself is not just zooming on ahead. He is reaching more through his shoulder, through his haunches. He still has the relaxation in the jaw, but his nose may come forward a little bit from the collection because you are allowing the entire spine to elongate. And it's different from the gallop. It's still a canter. It's still 3 beats. And the extended canter will cover a lot of ground, but not because the legs are going faster. Does that make sense?
Oh, definitely, definitely. And I think, we talked about the working, the medium, the collected and the extended, which are the dressage purist canter, right? But then you also said, and the Western riders may lope, and there was something else you said, which I think is a Katharine terminology, but I imagined a horse relaxing on a long rein. I can't remember what you just called it.
With the free canter.
That's right. That's right.
It.
So the free canter, it's not quite like the free walk, but you can say a free canter. So I think if you understand the working, the medium, the collected and the extended, and we also talked about the counter canter, I think that's important. But again, if your instructor talks about a different type of canter, or just get some sort of an explanation from them. What do they mean?
Right. It's all semantics. We all have the words that our instructors use, the words that, like all the things Mr. DeCumpy said, or things that I know I keep saying because, he was my mentor when I was very young. But then I pulled in some of my own. And, I worked with a lot of riders with disabilities and, even students who were dyslexic. And I had to find all kinds of ways to explain things and to make it this positive experience where they felt a sense of accomplishment in getting something, even if it was on the stoic, absolutely unflappable horse on the lunge, where it wasn't because they got it, it was because I told the horse to do it, but they still got to feel it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Now, you talked before about the extended not being the gallop. Can you talk about the gallop? Because in the English language, the gallop is different to the canter.
And when a horse gallops, which is what they often do when they're just free in a herd and they're getting from one place to another and kicking up and happy and they go galloping away, the gallop is actually 4 beats. And that diagonal pair that lands in the canter to make it the 3 beats, and then, the leading foreleg, and then the suspension. There's not a suspension in the gallop. The gallop rolls out like spokes on a wheel, and it just goes in the same thing. The gallop to the right, the first beat, in an ideal world, is the outside hind. Then it's the inside hind. Then it's the outside, and then it's the inside leading foreleg. So they roll out in evenly spaced, like spokes of a wheel. And it is fast. And there's such a thing as a hand gallop that we do where the horse is in a controlled gallop. He's on the aids and the rider is in a gallop or 2-point position and the horse is galloping on and you have influence over it. And a gallop is different. And a lot of times a horse will canter when he's playing with his friends and you can see the 3 beats and they're just doing little circles around each other. But when he straightens out and he rolls out and he wants to go somewhere, it rolls out into those 4 beats with that equal space between them. And that's called a gallop.
I think good exercises, good terminology. There's nothing different in Australia. Actually, no, there is a bit of a story there with the gallop. So in like Germany, gallop, I can't pronounce it in a German accent, but gallop, is canter and gallop, okay? So in the UK, in Canterbury, it wasn't called Canterbury then, they found a spring of eternal life, right? And everyone wanted to go to this spring of eternal life.
Ooh,
what they did is they got on their horses and as the word spread, from hundreds of miles around, everyone would gallop to this place where they were going to get the spring of eternal life, but the horses got pretty tired and they ended up cantering. So they called it the Canterbury Gallop, okay? And that's how the Canterbury Gallop came in. Must have been called canter. So the Canterbury Gallop came in to the language, and then it was shortened to the canter.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's way cool. Yeah.
All right. Anyway, so that's why, some languages just have the gallop and some have the canter and the gallop. But we also make a difference between the canter being 3-beat and the gallop being 4. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And the horses don't have words for it. They just have
do it.
these things they do, right?
Yeah. Now, tell us, what about the laterally gated horses? They're going to canter the same if they're... So laterally gated, I'm presuming you mean pace, like 2 legs one way, 2 legs the other way. Is that what you're meaning?
Yeah, that is what I mean. The lateral gait is when the intermediate gait of 2 beats is done by the legs on the same side. The right hind and the right fore work together, the left fore work together. And sometimes that can be 4 beats in a rack or different gaits that horses do. And in this country, there's a lot of laterally gated horses. Tennessee walking horses, Paso Finos, there's Rocky Mountain horses. They all will have, and it's a very smooth gait for a rider. That's the truth. There's not a lot of motion in it. But like with the Tennessee walking horses, and we're not talking about the awful big lick stuff. I'm surprised I even said the words, but the pleasure Tennessee walking horses, they're naturally shod or barefoot, and they're ridden in a whole different way, and they have pleasure classes, all these different things. Many years ago, when I was growing up, they had classes that did not canter at the horse shows because it was a difficult thing, and it is a different thing for a laterally gated horse. And when you're asking them to roll into the canter, it really is, I'm sorry to say, a lot of work the inside sitting bone and actually bring the outside leg back, because instead of coming from the trot or even the walk, to set them up subtly to pick up the canter is hard, because these legs are moving. If I could only, I'm trying to think how I describe it. It's like I'm doing it with my body. One side's forward, then the other side's forward, the whole side of the horse. So you make a sort of an extreme aid to show them that we're moving on to something entirely different. Even if you're going on a bend, which you can't bend real tight on a laterally gated horse. I'm sure some can, but it's actually a disservice to them, because the inside hind and foreleg are off the ground at the same time. The tighter the circle, the more you throw them off balance. And there's a lot of horses that have a lateral gait that trot also, like the 5-gaited saddlebred. And so getting them into the canter is easier because they understand and they can do the diagonal gaits. But one that has nothing else, you sort of have to let it step into it with a little bit of speed and a little exaggeration. And that's what I found with working with a lot of those horses through the years. And it's an explanation where you kind of leave no doubt. Otherwise, literally, they just speed up so that lateral gait gets faster and faster, because the understanding has to come from slightly bringing them out of balance out of that. Now, it's different if you're taking it from the walk or you're taking it like from the halt. But for them to be able to do that with a rider, they've had to learn it in another way so that they have it's rude. It's rude to just hold the horse a little bit back and then kick him as hard as you can so he jumps forward into a canter. That's just rude. So you want to teach them, and then they understand, okay, she wants a canter. And then you can do it. Like, we didn't even talk about transitions in canter. It's a whole nother world.
There's always another podcast, Katharine, so we can talk about a lot of other things. Yeah. And you, I tell you what, you would have to have had the most variety of subjects. You really have, because with such a wide variety of the subjects that you've chatted about. It's been wonderful. But
I enjoy it so much.
Yeah.
Horses.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So the laterally gated horses in the canter, I'm going to leave it to you, because I've done a little bit more with paces. Yeah, and tiny bit when I was in the States with with some of the other gated horses. But I think if someone's got a laterally gated horses that they need some tips on to get to canter, are you okay if they contact you? What's the best way to contact you?
Absolutely. You can get me in lots of different ways through the dharmahorse.org website. And we added a lot of things on the website for educational outreach. So there's modules, health modules, and there's old articles that I wrote. I don't have a lot of time to write. Running a horse sanctuary is a lot of work, and but there's a lot of old articles and things that have been put in the educational outreach to help people. So our website is a great place for information and a way to get a hold of me.
Yep, absolutely. So do they do it through the website, or is the email address on the website?
It's on the website, and there's contact us, and that'll come through in different ways, and has that.
Yep.
But yeah, horses matter. Horses matter so much to me on every level, and
yep.
I don't believe that I have all the answers and all the experience, and that I'm an expert in the world. But I have a lot of varied experiences, and always want to help and always want to learn. So that's life with horses.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Have you updated your website? I'm just having a quick look now.
I have.
Yeah, it looks good.
We are really trying to push ourselves to be more respectable. It's
I'm
hard.
just looking because that's your shelters at the front with the track system, is it?
That's it, yeah.
Yeah. And if people are interested in listening about the track system, I think if you go onto the Horse Chats website and even put in, track system, you'll get that, or else just go and type Katharine or type Chrisley and you'll get some of those. But go back to the horsechats.com website to get that info. Yeah.
Excellent.
Katharine, just a huge variety of subjects. I don't even know what you're going to come up with next, but I'm happy if you talk about transitions into canter, or, transitions altogether, or you've just got such a wide wealth of knowledge that I can sort of go into. Yeah, I'm happy to chat to you about horses.
I love it. Thank you, Glenys.
No worries at all. Okay, good to talk to you, Katharine. And I think for our listeners would like to talk to Katharine, contact her either through Dharma Horse, or if you can't remember where, just go to the Horse Chats website and Katharine with a K and do a search for her there. Beautiful.
All right.
Okay, thanks, Katharine. Good to talk to you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
If you've enjoyed this chat, then please comment, rate and subscribe. If you'd like any changes or recommendations for guests, then please contact us through horsechats.com. And while you're online, have a look at the government-accredited courses at internationalhorsecollege.com. Registered Training Organisation 31352.
Remember that our comments and instructions are general in nature and do not take into consideration your individual horses or your individual ability and circumstances. If you enjoyed this podcast, then please leave your comment below.